Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our ICC virtual presentation titled Unlocking the Power of the Edge with Ignition on Groov EPIC and Groov Rio. Now, for last year's ICC presentation, which is available on YouTube and on our website, we covered the topic of securing and democratizing OT data in brownfield devices with Ignition Edge, which was relatively a specific use case. In this presentation, however, we'll build upon the previous demos, but share several new edge architectures to address many different use cases. My name is Benson Hoagland, and I'm responsible for product strategy and marketing here at Opto 22. And like last year's presentation, I'm once again joined by Garrick Reichert, Senior Applications Engineer, who's standing by to answer your questions in real time as we progress through the webinar. Simply post your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to your questions as quickly as we can. Now, I am broadcasting live from our Opto Demo Studios here at Opto 22 headquarters in Temecula, California. And in this webinar, I'll be interacting with a lot of the gear that you see in this image here and demonstrate live how all the pieces come together. Now, quickly about Opto 22, for those who may be new to us and to our technology, we're a California-based, privately held manufacturer of industrial automation, hardware and software, with nearly 5 decades of experience, installed base in the millions at thousands of customers all over the globe. And here's a photo of our factory here in Temecula, California. It's where we design, build, and support everything that we make, built in the U.S.A. All the way. Now, our uniqueness in the industry really comes from our engineering philosophy of combining the best of the OT and IT worlds into an open and versatile platform, which is, of course, well suited for addressing today's digital transformation challenges. Now, our flagship products include Groov EPIC, Groov Rio, and Groov Rio EMU, all of which will be demonstrated and covered during this presentation. Now, we're going to cover a lot of material in the next 30 minutes, so you may want to revisit this webinar at a later date. No worries, we are recording this session and we'll provide a link and send an email to all registered attendees. Now, I will start off with very brief introduction on the edge platforms I'll be using during this presentation, and then I'll jump into 4 different edge architectures that feature both Groov products working with Ignition products. Then I'll jump into a live demo to demonstrate how each of these edge architectures come together. It's going to be action-packed session, so buckle your seatbelts. Now, we'll start with the Groov Rio platform. As an overview, there are 3 models. 2 of them with up to 8 channels of software configurable universal I/O plus 2 mechanical relays, and one of those models, the MM2 noted there in the middle, offers or comes with Ignition pre-installed, so that you can get your Ignition projects right down on a Rio as well. Then we have the Groov Rio EMU, or Energy Monitoring Unit, and this provides direct connectivity to electrical loads up to 3 phases with your choice of CTs, plus a 600-volt line coming back for measuring power and energy. All 3 offer native MQTT-B, Sparkplug B, and they have an onboard OPC UA server, so it makes it really easy to get started with getting the data out of these devices. They can be line powered, they can be PoE powered, your choice. And like all Groov products, the Rios are cyber secure out of the box, web managed, OT friendly, and IT approved. Now, Groov EPIC, on the other hand, is a higher-end hardware and software platform. It's really like an edge compute platform that combines into a single industrial backplane, a real-time Linux-based gateway controller and I/O, a rich suite of software tools, including Ignition and Ignition Edge, gateway functions like multiple network interfaces for network segmenting, building conduits, zoning, and even a VPN. And of course, again, zero trust cybersecurity out of the box, including user accounts, firewalls, certificate management, and much, much more. And like I mentioned with the Rios, all of this goodness comes packaged in an easily manageable way from web managed tools. It's easily managed by OT, and of course approved and blessed by IT. So as I mentioned, I'm going to cover 4 different architectures, edge-based architectures that work with the Ignition platform. We'll start with Groov Rio, and this illustration really is the kitchen sink. So these are all the features and capabilities that are offered on a Rio and how it fits in an architecture. But let's simplify this down to our first edge use case. In this case, we're going to use Groov Rio as a remote I/O for a full ignition gateway that I'll be having running here on my PC that I'm presenting from, just using the trial version of Ignition. We'll collect the data. I'll show you how to configure, how the I/O is configured, how the OPC UA server is configured. Then we'll jump over to the Ignition gateway on my PC, make a connection, and show you some perspective screens. The next edge architecture takes us up a notch. We'll actually now feature a Groov Rio MM2 and use Ignition Edge on board with its Allen Bradley PLC drivers that are included with Ignition Edge, and we'll connect to an Allen Bradley PC as you see there in the architecture. We'll again pull all that data, bundle it up, and in this case we're going to use MQTT Sparkplug B to send all that data to a broker. And then I'll fire up my other Ignition gateway, which is a public Ignition gateway, and show you some perspective screens there as well. Then we're going to switch gears over to an EPIC-based edge architecture, which will feature, of course, the Groov EPIC, but also we're going to show on one of those edge architectures using Ignition Edge, and in another case, full ignition running on the EPIC. So again, here's kind of the soup to nuts, all the various capabilities of an EPIC. But again, I'm going to drill this down to our edge case number 3, where we're just using some of those software pieces. And this is on my Opto turbine demo, which is right here behind me. I'll be showing that in the demo, or in the live portion. Now this full feature demo has it all, but we're again going to focus just on Ignition Edge running on the EPIC, collecting data from Allen Bradley and Siemens PLCs, plus the control program that's actually operating the turbine. And we're going to publish that data as well up to my broker, and then again show that public ignition gateway consuming those tags, and we'll show you some perspective screens with that as well. And as you can see from this drawing, we're also sending data up to cloud platforms, but that's really a topic for another webinar. So let's move on to our fourth one, and this one's kind of interesting. This last edge architecture is the one being used by manufacturers throughout the state of Indiana as part of the state-funded Energy Insights program. Now, this architecture features a Groov EPIC, but not as a controller or an I/O system, but simply as an industrial PC or gateway running full ignition along with the full suite of Cirrus Link MQTT modules. Now in this case, we're also using Groov Rio emus and a Groov Rio that are actually installed in this plant, connected to compressors that provide compressed air to our manufacturing line, and also Groov Rio to pull in the whole building energy that we're using. We'll show how the emus collect the data and send that data to the EPIC with the ignition modules. In that case, it's going to be a broker literally locally on the EPIC. And then we're going to pull all that data in, and then we're going to use Ignition UDTs to model that data, and then send that all the way up to AWS IoT Sitewise. So we're going to move all that data up there, and we'll show it there. But I'm also sending it to other brokers, so we'll actually show you a dashboard with that as well. So we have a lot to cover here in the next 20 minutes or so. It's a lot of architectures, a lot of data moving around freely and securely. I promised an action-packed demo, so let's get to it. So what I'm going to do is switch my screen over here, and I'm going to pull up my browser window. There we go. And I'll start off by revisiting that first architecture. So here it is. We've got some I/O connected to a Rio. We're going to log into this system and show you how all the pieces come together. Before I do that, let's get a quick look at what we're playing with here. This is a Rio. This is a standard Rio, not the MM2, but the MM1. And you can see I've got some various I/O channels here wired up. I've got some discretes, I've got some analog, some temperatures. All that is coming into the system. And there you can also see that I've got it connected to an Ethernet cable. That, of course, is PoE, so this device is being powered by PoE. But pretty compact, DIN rail mounted. Drop it in where you need to pull in a few tags. And now I'm going to show you actually logging into the system and getting this thing going. So first things first, let's log into this Rio sitting right here on my desk. So I'm going to switch back here, and all I did was go to a shortcut there, Rio LC1 Benson, And as you can see, I must log into the Rio with the username and password, and I'm also doing this over a secure channel. So this is fully HTTPS, 100% encrypted and secure. And here's where my accounts are. I just have one local account on the device, and that's the Opto account I just logged in with. But as you can see, I also support LDAP. More on that later. Now let's take a look at the network settings. We want to see how does this thing live on the network. So I'm going to go to Network, over to Status, and here we can see on Ethernet 0, we are connected to the IT LAN in this case, which has DHCP services. That means IT can manage this device. Also, I have as you can see, a host name. So I actually access the device via its host name rather than an IP address. IP addresses are supported, of course, but we're going to use host names. So now I'm going to come back and show you how the I/O channels were configured. When I click on there, here they are configured. You can see the device here. I've got a top button, a bottom button, a fuel level, temperature, and so on. Well, let's take a look at how this was configured. So I'm going to click into bottom button here. That's this bottom button here. And I'm going to click over to configure. And there is where I give it the name of the I/O channel. So we're not dealing with register addresses. We have real names, and these names become the OPC item name, or if we were electing to use MQTT, it'd be the topic name for this particular channel. And then here I can go ahead and select what type of signal is wired up to that channel. And as you can see, there's a lot of options. Over 200,000 different variations with a single Rio. This one also features has a feature for counting on that particular channel, so I do have that indicated here. But what's important is this public access. What this is what are the data values that I want to expose via OPC UA, or if I was using MQTT, what data I want to publish as MQTT messages. Pretty straightforward, just click the ones that you want, and that will be available through both those protocols. Now, while I'm on this screen, I can test my I/O, make sure, as I push this button, I can see that it's coming on. So this is really useful for making sure you have things wired up properly. All right, now we've got our I/O configured. We're on the network. Now we're going to configure the data service. And in this case, the data service can be OPC, can be MQTT. We're going to focus on OPC here. So we're going to go to Scan Devices, and this is basically the screen that says what kind of data are you getting from the Rio that you want to ultimately expose to any of the protocols that are supported. Pretty standard fare here. I can select also which protocols I want to make that available to. OPC UA is there, of course. That's the one we'll use. But as you can see, I could easily do MQTT Sparkplug or MQTT strings. And I can do all these simultaneously. So you don't have to make a choice between OPC and MQTT. They're both supported, and they're both supported simultaneously. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and look at the OPC UA configuration. This is how we're going to provide the information to an OPC client to connect to this device. The big one, of course, is the OPC discovery endpoint. So I'll actually use that in the ignition gateway as a client connecting to this server. In this case, I've got a lot of security settings here as well. I'm making this really easy and just doing anonymous access. And that's really it. We're essentially done from the Rio perspective. Now let's go ahead and log into the local ignition gateway that's running here on my PC. You can see there I'm in trial mode, so I just downloaded Ignition, installed it, and then I simply go into configuration here and I scroll down to OPC connections. And there it is, Rio LC1 Benson OPC UA server. So now I can come over here and click the endpoint, and just as I showed you in the Groov Manage screens, there is my endpoint URL. And that's it. That's the configuration. This client will automatically connect over to the OPC UA server on the Rio and pull all the tags in. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I've actually started up Designer on my local gateway here, and there you can see it. There's all my tags. I can go in here and turn on the bottom button. I'll see that turn on. And also my counter increment. I've got my fuel level here. That's also changing as I rotate my potentiometer here, temperature, and so on. And then all I did was really drag these over here onto this perspective canvas and build a perspective screen. Let's take a look. So I'm going to open up again a new tab, Come down here to localhost perspective. Again, this is running on my local machine here, and there I have it. There's my blue ring LED, and as I click it, you'll see this little LED go off. I've got my top button state, that's a latch, and my bottom button state. As I press and let go, you can see the same thing is occurring. Got my potentiometer here with my gallons in engineering units. And finally, writing to outputs works as well, just like I showed the blue ring LED. There you can see as I slide this slider up and down, I am actually changing the LED backlight. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and that is our simplest example for an edge architecture with Groov Rio working with Ignition. So I won't be using the local host anymore. My next demos are all going to be using my main gateway, which is publicly accessible. Let's take a look at that, and we move into architecture number 2. Now this one is using a Groov Rio MM2, and this one does have Ignition installed. So I'm going to switch over to my screen and give you a sense of what that looks like. There it is. It's right over this wall. I've got the Rio MM2 that's connected to the network over Wi-Fi, and then over Ethernet, it's connected to the Allen Bradley PLC. So what I'm going to do is collect all the Allen Bradley tags and the I/O tags from the Rio, and we're going to bundle those up and use that with Ignition Edge to actually grab all the data, all those tags. We're going to send it all the way up to an MQTT broker. In this case, it's an MQTT broker up in the cloud. We're using HiveMQ in this case. And then I'll go over to my public Ignition gateway, and I'll connect to that broker and pull all the tags that are being produced by that Rio that's again down here in the bottom of my screen. Let's get started. So we're going to come down here, and I'm going to log in again into the Groov Rio MM2, the one down here in this lower screen. I'll click sign in, and once again I am going to, it looks about the same as the other Rio I just connected to, with of course the exception of this Ignition button here. So I've showed you the rest of the configurations, which are the same. What's unique about the MM2 is Ignition. And indeed, this will come up and I can see that I'm running Ignition Edge, what version, everything is done here. No need to go to the command line or anything like that. It's all built in to the Rio. So here we go. We're going to log into the Ignition Edge gateway, and we'll have to log in. Again, we're over a secure connection, always a secure connection, always authenticated. So let me go ahead and click through here. And once I get into the Ignition Edge instance running on the Rio, same idea. I can go into the config. I won't show you the OPC connection again for the Rio I/O, but I will show you the device connections to the Allen Bradley PLC. And indeed, there it is. I am connected, and I can see that I can now pull all the tags from the Allen Bradley controller right into the Rio, and then we'll go ahead and use MQTT transmission, which I go down here to those settings, and I'm actually going to see what server I have configured. This is the broker. So I'm going to now take all the data and I'm going to send it up to this HiveMQ cloud broker. And that's basically the configuration as being complete at the Rio MM2. Now this, what I'm showing you now, is the designer out of that Rio MM2. And indeed, there's all my tags. They're in a folder called MQTT tags. There's everything just as we saw it live. And that's all the data that's going to get moved up to the broker. So let's go up and take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to go over to my screen, my browser screen, and we're going to come down to the next thing here, which is the main Ignition gateway. So in this case, I'm now logged into demo.groov.com, which is our public gateway that provides a lot of, it's connected to a lot of demos. Quickly, the only thing that's that we have to set up here is something called Engine, MQTT Engine. It's the only configuration we need. And MQTT Engine simply points to the same broker so that it can consume all the tags. Once it's there, now I can build in some perspective screens. And just to show you designer on this full public demo gateway, there it is. This is the designer for that Ignition demo Groov. And in this case, you can see there's my Rio LC Studio, and all of those same tags are automatically appearing up on my full gateway, which means, of course, I can start building applications. So I'm going to go back and show you what that application looks like. Again, we'll use perspective. So I'll scroll down to here, And this is a public demo. Garrick, you can drop a link in so that you can try this yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as a trial user and password of Opto22. And there you have it. Now that's the device that's down here in the lower pane. There's all the I/O data. I can change set points on the PID. Yes, Rios have 4 PID loops. So I just changed the set point there. I can also interact with the AB data. In fact, I can go ahead and turn on the stack light on the AB PLC. That's because MQTT is bidirectional. Even though we're outbound publishing from the Rio, no inbound ports open, I can send the data up to the broker, but I can also receive commands back. And as you can see, it's lickety split fast. As soon as I click it on the main public demo gateway, it occurs, the command occurs right down there in the field. So pretty slick there. Got to move on, got a lot to cover. So we're going to jump into my third architecture. And my third architecture looks like this. This is now we're talking about my Opto demo. So again, here there's a lot going on this particular demo. I've been using this demo for years. If you've seen any of my other webinars, they're all primarily from this demo. But real quickly, I'll give you a kind of a quick look at what the pieces are working here. I have a control program running on this EPIC. It's operating this turbine amongst a bunch of other things. It's also connected on its own private network to these PLCs. So I'm ingesting the data plus the controller data for the control program from the turbine, and I'm again sending it up to that same broker. And then of course I've got a little HDMI display. EPICs support HDMI, so I've got a local operator interface right there as well. All right, so we're going to switch back and we're going to jump into the EPIC. And let's go right here, EPIC DC turbine. Now one thing that's different here is I'm logging in with a different username and password. This is actually my Active Directory account here at the on the Opto22 network. So like I said before, I can have local accounts or LDAP accounts, and that makes it really nice for managing who has access to EPICs or Rios all from a central location. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and jump into the network status and again show you the network status screen just like I did on Rio. In this case, the EPIC has 2 segmented Ethernet ports and VPN, so I hang the PLCs off of one and I use the other Ethernet connection to get outbound access to the broker. So pretty straightforward there, not too complicated, but lots of capability and configuration. And then finally, again, we have Ignition Edge in this particular Edge architecture, which is again number 3. Same idea. I'll go ahead and go into Configure. I'll log in, again, always securely, and I am in. Now the only difference with this system as opposed to the Rio MM2 that I just showed you is in MQTT transmission, I'm actually talking to multiple servers. So I'm not only just talking to my own cloud server, but I'm talking to another cloud broker there, and I'm actually moving a lot of different data sets to different brokers. So that's all available within these architectures. It's not a one-to-one connection, it's a decoupled architecture, allowing me to move the data where I want it to go. Same thing here, I'm taking all of those tags from the turbine, from the AB PLC and the Siemens PLC, and again, I'm moving them up to my full gateway, and I'll just go ahead and show you what that perspective screen looks like. And here it is. So now I've got my EPIC controller data. This is the turbine. I can go ahead and turn the turbine on or off. Again, bidirectional. I got my Allen Bradley PLC data there. I can turn on the stack light, and as you can see, the performance is astonishing. It's also 100% end-to-end encrypted and secure. Same thing with my my green stack light on my Siemens PLC. You guys all have public access to this, so you can play around with it as well. Okay, we're doing pretty good on time. We got our last architecture, and this one is pretty interesting. As I mentioned earlier, this particular demo is actually being used in the state of Indiana. And it's where we're using an EPIC, not as a controller or an I/O system, but simply as a gateway running full ignition. So let me switch my screen around. I'm going to move my my Rio off, and we're going to make this guy center stage. There we go. And there's the EPIC. As you can see, it's pretty compact. Power supply, processor, got a little door here I can open up, and you can see I've got my Ethernet connection, HDMI, because I'm actually taking the data from this EPIC and presenting it on a HDMI monitor behind me, along with keyboard and mouse for USB. But that's it. Very compact, very lightweight, a full-featured quad-core ARM-based Linux PC is essentially what that boils down to. So what we're going to do is we'll switch back and we'll jump into, before I jump into the EPIC first, what I will do is jump into this Rio EMU that's collecting this energy data, because you'll see that I'm getting a lot of information from that compressor. So I'm going to log in and we're going to jump right into I/O channels, and the I/O channels look a little different here than they do on a regular Rio. There is all of this data. This is all the power and energy being generated from that compressor. Now that's a lot of data. There's a lot of tags on there. And the purpose of this architecture is to get all of this energy data and power data up to AWS site-wise for unsupervised AI. We don't need to move all of this data into the cloud. So that's why we use Ignition on that EPIC. And let's go ahead and log into that. We use Ignition on the EPIC to actually build UDTs of this data. Now the Rio EMUs and the Rio at the service entrance is pushing its data into this EPIC, where we have the MQTT modules from distributor, from Cirrus Link Solutions. And just real quickly, you can see, yes, I'm actually running full Ignition here. We'll go ahead and open that up. And in this case, again, I'll have to log in. Everything is secure. So we'll go ahead and log in there. And in this case, we are using pretty much all the MQTT modules from Cirrus Link here. We've got our distributor, which means that this guy is also a broker. So the EMUs are sending the data to the broker. I got engine to pull the tags out and into a tag provider. And then I use transmission to send those tags all the way up to AWS. And we'll just take a look at the servers there. And you can see, indeed, I'm actually moving it to multiple AWS instances all simultaneously, plus to my own demo Ignition gateway. So again, just really showing the flexibility of moving the data where it needs to be for consumption by a number of different applications. So that's how I've set up that. But let's take a quick look at the UDTs on that guy. So as I said, the data first flows into MQTT engine with all my EMU data, and there's, like I said, a lot of tags there. But we don't want all those tags to go to the cloud, so we're going to jump over to my AWS IoT site-wise tag provider, and I'm going to go into Udt Definitions. And this is where I get to build out actual UDTs that pull the data out of engine, model the data into a model that will then turn into an asset, and then use that to send the data up. So let's take a look at those tags. So now we're actually looking at, instead of raw data tags, we're actually looking at now modeled data that's coming from the system. And that's what's going up to AWS Sitewise. Now I'm not going to open up Sitewise here. That's again a cloud applications we'll talk about in another webinar. But I did build a screen because, again, I'm sending this data also to my own broker. I did build a screen to give you a sense of what that looks like coming in. But instead of showing you perspective this time, I'm actually going to open up an OPC UA client that's connected to my full demo gateway, and that is right here, the Opto turbine. And this screen is, again, just another OPC UA client connected to the Ignition gateway, and that simply shows, there's a lot of flexibility there as well. Ignition is a terrific product, covers all the bases, but maybe you have some other OPC UA client that's your favorite for whatever reason. That's an example here. I happen to like Groovrio, and this is Groovrio running on a Windows server. Again, I can turn on and off the turbine here, just as like I did with the perspective screens. But more importantly, what I have here is all of that building power. So I can see how much energy my compressor is used, what its true power is, what its current is, even its power factor. And all of this data is also simultaneously going up to AWS Sitewise. So there you have it. I've bumped up into my 30-minute mark, and I'm sure you have some questions. Hopefully Garrick's been answering them as we go along, and I will provide some a moment for questions. But I think in summary, what we've showed you is 4 different architectures, starting off with something very simple on Rio, all the way to something not necessarily complex, but a lot of capability with full ignition on an EPIC to address a number of different types of applications. And I think that's what's important. Now, we're up at the 10:30 mark. Our good friends at 4IR Solutions have their demo at 10:30. So if you have to take off and go check out their stuff, please do. They're a terrific partner of Opto. But we will stay on. Garrick and I will stay on and answer any remaining questions as we move through the final stages of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you on your edge architectures.